There is a strange kind of silence around men who choose to remain single. A quiet suspicion, a subtle discomfort. Society doesn't quite know where to place them. They don't fit into the warm familiarity of family portraits, nor do they echo the expected rhythm of tradition. And yet, many of them thrive, not in defiance of the world, but in something more mysterious, more ancient. This video is not about glorifying loneliness. It's not about bashing relationships or promoting isolation. It's about something deeper, a truth that has existed since the days of clay scrolls and garden philosophies. A truth whispered in ancient Athens by a man who understood desire so well he chose to live without most of it. His name was Epicurus, and his truth still rattles the modern cage. Today, we're told that fulfillment comes from connection, that happiness must be shared to be real, that a man without a partner is either broken, dangerous, or selfish. But what if some men are not lost, just listening to a different signal? What if solitude, when chosen with awareness, becomes a kind of sanctuary, a training ground for clarity, focus, and inner power? Epicurus didn't live in a cave or denounce pleasure. In fact, he taught that pleasure is the very root of a good life, but not the loud kind, not the overstimulated rush of modern dopamine. He pointed toward stillness, toward the gentle joy that arises when a man is free from unnecessary desire, when he eats simply, speaks honestly, and isn't pulled in 10 directions by other people's expectations. Thousands of years later, his philosophy continues to whisper a dark truth, that some men, when they stop chasing what society says they should want, begin to thrive in ways that look invisible from the outside, but feel like freedom on the inside. In this video, we'll explore that path, not through empty praise of bachelorhood, but through psychology, history, and deep reflection. We'll ask why some men lose themselves in relationships, while others find themselves in solitude. We look at the legacy of Epicurus and what it means in a world where attention is currency, and solitude is seen as suspect. So if you've ever felt different for walking alone, if you've ever wondered whether peace lies not in more, but in less, then this story is for you. Stay with me. There's something sacred in the quiet, something powerful, and something very few dare to see until they stop running and finally sit still. To understand why some single men quietly flourish while the world watches with confusion, or even suspicion, we have to travel back to a garden on the outskirts of Athens. Not a palace, not a war camp, but a humble garden, the garden of Epicurus, here, over 2,300 years ago. A quiet revolution was growing among olive trees and quiet conversations. Epicurus, the man behind it all, was not some cynical hermit or bitter loner. He was a teacher of joy, a philosopher who believed that the purpose of life was not conquest or fame, but a kind of deep peace, what he called ataraxia, a freedom from disturbance. He taught his followers that the key to happiness was not in constant striving, but in removing unnecessary pain. In other words, stop feeding the beast of endless craving. In his time, most philosophers focused on the external, on virtue, honor, duty, and the state. Epicurus turned inward. He told his followers that friendship mattered more than political power, that simple pleasures, were more satisfying than luxury, and that freedom was worth more than romantic entanglements. That often brought more turmoil than tranquility. And here is where it gets interesting. Unlike the Stoics, who embraced discipline and duty even if it came with suffering, Epicurus leaned into contentment. He created a space, his garden, where men and women could live as equals, free from the constraints of traditional gender roles, social hierarchy, or marital expectations. Many of his students remained unmarried by choice, not out of hatred for love, but out of loyalty to peace. This was radical. In ancient Greece, a man's worth was often measured by his family lineage, his civic duty, his children. A man without a wife or heirs was viewed with suspicion. And yet, Epicurus flourished. His circle thrived, and the garden became a sanctuary for those seeking a different path. Fast forward to the Roman Empire, and we see echoes of this same idea. Stoic thinkers like Seneca and Marcus Aurelius warned of the dangers of desire and the emotional chaos that can come from romantic entanglements. Even though their philosophies differed from Epicurus, they, too, saw solitude not as a punishment, but as a space for self-mastery. In many Eastern traditions, this idea deepens. Buddhist monks, Taoist sages, and Sufi mystics all point toward withdrawal from the distractions of the world to cultivate inner clarity. In their view, solitude is not loneliness. It is the soil where awareness grows. And a man who knows how to be alone is not empty. He is full of something the world cannot name. But not all societies embraced this ideal. In medieval Europe, marriage was often not just encouraged, it was enforced. The church viewed celibacy outside religious life with deep skepticism. A single man was either a threat or a misfit. Social roles were rigid. Your value was measured by your ability to contribute to lineage, land, or labor. To step outside that system was to invite judgment, exclusion, or worse. Yet even in those dark times, the solitary man persisted. He became the archetype of the wandering monk, the exiled prophet, the lone scholar. Think of figures like Leonardo da Vinci, who never married and spent his life immersed in art, science, and invention. Or Nikola Tesla, who famously claimed that celibacy was essential to his creative energy. These men weren't failures in love. They chose a different love, a love of freedom, a devotion to inner worlds. In modern times, the narrative around single men has evolved, but not always in healthier ways. Today, the image of the single man is often caricatured. Either he's a commitment-phobic playboy or a socially awkward failure. Media pushes the idea that true maturity and wholeness only come through romantic partnership. The lone man is a red flag, not a red-blooded human being with agency and awareness. And yet, quietly, under the surface, more and more men are choosing a different path. Not out of bitterness, not out of failure, but out of discernment. They're seeing the cost of relationships built on neediness rather than mutual strength. They're watching marriages collapse, emotional boundaries dissolve, and peace disappear under the weight of expectations. Many are waking up to the wisdom of Epicurus. That thriving doesn't come from performing a role. It comes from aligning with your truth. And sometimes, that truth means walking alone. Not forever, not in arrogance, but for as long as it takes to remember who you are when no one is watching. This isn't about retreating from love. It's about refusing to trade peace for chaos. It is about understanding that a man's value is not in how many people he can please or provide for, but in how deeply he knows his own heart. So while society continues to obsess over relationship status and romantic milestones, a deeper movement is happening quietly. Some men are choosing simplicity, choosing solitude, choosing the garden over the battlefield, and in doing so, they're rediscovering something ancient. Not the cold silence of isolation, but the warm quiet of freedom. To fully understand why some single men thrive, not just survive, we must enter the deep psychological terrain beneath the surface of our social instincts. Because this is not just a matter of lifestyle, it is a matter of identity, energy, and the architecture of the human psyche. Let us begin with a simple but confronting truth from depth psychology. Many people enter relationships not from wholeness, but from a hidden wound. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist, called this the anima and animus dynamic, the unconscious projection of the opposite gender within the psyche. In other words, men often project their inner feminine, their emotional, creative, nurturing side onto the women they desire, and instead of integrating that part within themselves, they chase it externally, hoping someone else will complete what feels missing. When that projection is unconscious, the relationship becomes loaded. The partner becomes a symbol, not a person. Love turns into obsession. Attachment becomes addiction. The man loses himself, not because the woman is dangerous, but because he has not yet met his own inner world. This is where solitude becomes not just helpful, but sacred. For the single man who is consciously alone, solitude becomes a mirror, a place to confront those projections, to reclaim his emotional range, to build inner structure. He stops outsourcing his wholeness. He learns to hold his own chaos. He becomes what Jung would call individuated, a man who is not ruled by unconscious drives, but guided by a deeper, integrated self. Now contrast this with the social messages men receive today. From early on, boys are taught to seek validation externally through achievements, appearances, or romantic conquest. Emotional literacy is rarely nurtured. Vulnerability is often mocked. And so many grow into men who measure their worth through what they can offer others, not who they are in stillness. This creates what psychologists call anxious attachment, a pattern where the self is only secure when affirmed by another. It breeds dependency, not intimacy. And when a man hasn't developed a strong internal world, relationships become more about filling a void than sharing a life. But when a man chooses to be single with awareness, not as avoidance, but as self-mastery, something shifts. His nervous system begins to regulate itself. His identity stabilizes. He stops performing. He begins to live from the inside out. Here's where modern neuroscience supports ancient wisdom. Studies show that regular solitude, when intentional and not rooted in trauma, boosts creativity, emotional regulation, and cognitive clarity. The brain, when not bombarded with social noise, can enter deeper states of reflection. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for executive function and decision-making, thrives in quiet. Dopamine levels balance out. The body moves from fight or flight to rest and integrate. This explains why many single men, when they embrace solitude, report feeling more energized, focused, and aligned with purpose. Not because they've rejected the world, but because they've taken the time to know their own. Sufi mysticism also speaks to this. Rumi once wrote that the soul grows not in the crowd, but in the silence between the breaths. The Sufi path often begins with khalwa, spiritual seclusion, not as punishment, but as purification. In solitude, the seeker faces the ego's illusions and returns to divine presence. It's a path of shedding desires, expectations, false identities, until only essence remains. And that's the paradox. While modern culture celebrates loudness, busyness, and social proof, many of history's most integrated men were formed in silence. Moses in the desert, Muhammad in the cave, Buddha under the tree, Christ in the wilderness. Again and again, we see a pattern. Solitude births transformation. But not all solitude is the same. There is a difference between conscious solitude and emotional exile. Conscious solitude is chosen. It is grounded. It is generative. A man in this space is not hiding. He is refining. He is pruning away distractions to focus on what is real. Emotional exile, on the other hand, is a form of disconnection. It is when a man isolates because he feels unworthy of connection or wounded by past intimacy. This path breeds bitterness, not growth. This is why intention matters. A single man must ask himself, am I running away from love? Or am I making space for something deeper to grow? From a social lens, single men are often misunderstood because their value cannot be easily commodified. In a system that values productivity and visibility, the man who is not constantly seeking approval is a quiet rebellion. He is not trying to climb a ladder. He is not trying to prove his masculinity through conquest or income. He is not easy to manipulate, and that can make people uncomfortable. But it also makes him free. A man who thrives alone learns to differentiate between desire and need. He may still want companionship, but he does not crumble without it. He can offer love without losing himself. He can receive affection without becoming dependent. He becomes magnetic, not because he is trying to attract, but because he radiates something rare, sovereignty. This sovereignty is what Epicurus spoke of. A life where pleasure is simple, desire is tempered, and freedom is more important than approval. In his garden, relationships were not rejected, they were purified. Only those bonds which nourished peace were worth keeping. Imagine that applied to modern life. What if every man asked not just how can I get a partner, but what kind of energy do I allow into my space? What if partnership was not a default, but a conscious choice? A meeting between two whole beings, not two wounded ones. This is the psychological shift that conscious solitude makes possible. It allows men to stop performing and start becoming, to reclaim their inner feminine, their creativity, their sensitivity, their purpose, not from others, but from within. And when that happens, the man becomes complete, not perfect, not invulnerable, but whole in a way that no relationship, no matter how beautiful, can manufacture for him. He no longer fears being alone, because he's not alone. He has met himself, and that is where real power begins. So what happens when a man ignores this path? When he never enters solitude, never turns inward, never separates his identity from the relationships and expectations that surround him? He becomes fragmented, not visibly at first. On the outside, he may look successful. Maybe he's married, respected, admired. But underneath, his soul is whispering, then shouting, and eventually going quiet. Because the man who never learns to stand alone will always be leaning on something or someone else to keep him upright. His confidence becomes conditional, his peace unstable, his decisions clouded by fear of disconnection. This isn't theory. This is lived reality for millions. Psychologists now refer to something called enmeshment. When a person's emotional identity becomes so entangled with someone else's that they no longer know where they end and the other begins. It often happens in relationships that look loving on the surface, but lack boundaries. One person becomes the emotional caretaker, the other becomes dependent. Over time, resentment replaces intimacy. Freedom disappears. For men, this can be especially devastating. Many are conditioned to be providers, to serve, fix, rescue, perform. But when that role becomes the core of their identity, they lose touch with who they are beyond what they can offer. And when the relationship ends, through divorce, betrayal, or death, they don't just lose a partner, they lose themselves. You see it in the empty stares, the quiet breakdowns, the sudden midlife crises. The man who spent decades giving everything to everyone and never once asked what he needed. The man who followed the script only to realize it was never written for his peace, only his productivity. And then there's the opposite, the man who rejects relationship altogether, but not from power, from pain. These are the wounded men, the ones burned by betrayal or raised by chaos. They turn solitude into a fortress, not a sanctuary. They adopt cynicism like armor. They might say they don't need anyone, but the truth is, they've never learned how to be with others without losing themselves. So they choose control over connection, safety over vulnerability, and their solitude, instead of expanding them, shrinks them. Both paths, the enmeshed and the exiled, are missing the same thing: conscious awareness. Without it, a man will either drown in the expectations of others or starve in his own emotional desert. Epicurus warned against both extremes. He spoke of moderation, of simplicity, of removing unnecessary suffering. He didn't tell men to isolate. He told them to be selective, to choose relationships that nourish rather than drain, to seek pleasure, but the kind that lasts, the kind that grows, from clarity, not chaos. In today's world, where overstimulation is constant and distraction is profitable, many men never get the silence they need to even ask these questions. They go from one relationship to the next, one role to another, boyfriend, husband, father, provider, without ever pausing to ask, who am I underneath all this? What do I believe? What kind of life do I want? And here lies the quiet danger. If a man does not define his life, the world will do it for him. Social pressure fills the vacuum. Cultural narratives take over. Algorithms begin to shape desire. And before he knows it, his choices aren't his. His dreams aren't his. Even his heartbreak isn't his, it's inherited. But the man who chooses solitude, even temporarily, interrupts that cycle. He stops reacting and starts reflecting. He begins to witness his own thoughts, to question the stories he's absorbed. He may feel lonely at first, even lost, but slowly, something begins to bloom. He starts sleeping better. He gets more honest with himself. He starts building rituals, not routines, walks at dusk, journaling at sunrise, time away from screens. He listens more, not to noise, but to intuition, the voice that has been buried under years of performing. And then something else happens. His relationships begin to change, not because he avoids them, but because he no longer needs them to survive. He can love from overflow, not emptiness. He can say no without guilt. He can choose quality over codependency. He becomes a friend who listens deeply, a leader who leads gently, a partner who loves without clinging. He is no longer trying to complete himself through others. He has become a whole man in a fragmented world. And that's dangerous, in the best way. Because such a man cannot be manipulated through shame or fear. He cannot be sold a dream that isn't his. He cannot be pulled into drama because his peace is not up for trade. Throughout history, we've seen the power and threat of men who are free in this way. The mystic in the mountains, the poet in exile, the monk in silence, the artist in his studio, the philosopher under the fig tree. They were not loud, they were not popular, but they moved civilizations, not because they chased influence, but because they became anchored, not because they had crowds, but because they had clarity, not because they rejected love, but because they purified it. And that's what modern men are being called to reclaim. Not superficial independence, but deep sovereignty, not isolation, but inner strength, not rebellion, but alignment. The consequence of ignoring this path is quiet suffering, the kind that looks like success on the outside, but feels like hollowness on the inside. But the reward of walking it, peace, purpose, presence, a life where nothing is missing, because nothing false is needed. That's why some single men thrive, not because they are alone, but because they are finally with themselves. The beauty of Epicurus' wisdom and the deeper psychological truths we've explored is this. You do not need to radically escape the world to reclaim your inner wholeness. You do not need to renounce love or live in the mountains. What you need is a change in how you relate to yourself. This section is not about glorifying loneliness. It's about offering tools, grounded, practical, powerful tools, to help you cultivate the kind of solitude that transforms rather than isolates. A solitude that deepens your strength, clarifies your vision, and reconnects you to your core. We begin where all inner revolutions begin. Awareness.1. Create sacred space for solitude. Solitude is not just the absence of people. It is the presence of self. Many men feel alone, yet are still mentally plugged into the noise, scrolling, consuming, reacting. To reclaim solitude, start small. Dedicate a fixed time daily where there is no input. No screens. No music. No news. Just you. Use this time for journaling, walking, sitting in silence. This is your inner mirror. It's where your soul, which is always whispering beneath the distractions, can finally be heard. And yes, it may feel uncomfortable at first. You may meet old feelings, boredom, sadness, shame. But these are not enemies. They are parts of you asking to be integrated. Stay with them. Listen. 2. Practice emotional integration, not suppression. Modern men are often emotionally starved, not because they feel less, but because they've been taught to feel less. But your emotions are not a threat to your masculinity. They are guides. They are messengers. Begin with this practice each night. Before sleep, ask yourself, what did I feel today? Not what did I do, but what moved me, triggered me, inspired me, unsettled me. Write it down. Don't judge, just observe. Over time, patterns will emerge: insecurities, values, triggers, longings. And when you see these patterns, you gain the power to change them. This is the foundation of emotional sovereignty. 3. Study the art of detachment, but not apathy. Epicurus did not preach coldness. He spoke of detaching from unnecessary pain, not from the world entirely. There is a Buddhist term, apaya, meaning skillful means. It means to live in the world wisely, without clinging, without aversion. To love, but not attach. To engage, but not depend. You can practice this through simple exercises. When you want something, a relationship, recognition, an outcome, pause. Ask, will this add peace to my life, or just another chain? If the desire comes from fear, it's a chain. If it comes from truth, it's a choice. Point 4. Engage in purposeful creation, not passive consumption. One of the fastest ways to reclaim your inner world is to create something with your hands, mind, or body. Write. Build. Draw. Grow something. Fix something. Move your body in a disciplined way. Creation reconnects you to agency. It reminds you that you are not just a consumer of life, but a generator of meaning. Epicurus cultivated a garden. Diogenes had only a cloak and a barrel, but he shaped entire philosophies from his defiance. Your tools can be simple. What matters is the intention. Creation anchors you in the present and pulls your power back from passive dependency. 5. Reframe loneliness as a rite of passage. Most men avoid solitude because of the shadow that follows it, loneliness. But loneliness, when consciously entered, is not a curse. It is a rite of passage, a sacred fire. In mythology, heroes do not grow through comfort. They grow through isolation. In the belly of the whale, the desert, the cave, loneliness is part of the alchemical process that burns away false selves and forges truth. Instead of fearing it, bless it. When loneliness shows up, say, "Here comes my teacher. Here comes the shadow I must learn to hold." You will emerge from this not broken, but reborn. 6. Develop inner masculine structure. This may sound abstract, but it is vital. The inner masculine is not about domination or ego. It is about presence, direction, clarity. When a man lacks internal masculine structure, he drifts. He chases. He reacts. He waits for others to give him purpose. But when that structure is strong, he leads himself, even through storms. You can build this through consistent habits, daily routines that anchor you. Discipline with flexibility. Clear boundaries with your time, energy, and focus. You do not need to be perfect. But you must be honest. What do you want to build? Who do you want to become? Write it down. Visualize it. Move toward it. Every day. 7. Connect to something greater than yourself. Epicurus was not a nihilist. He believed in the good, in beauty, in peace. He just didn't outsource it to the gods. But that doesn't mean you must walk this path alone. Whether it's spirituality, nature, sacred texts, or ancestral traditions, connect with something greater, something eternal, something that reminds you that you are part of a much larger unfolding. You were not born to just pay bills and date. You were born to grow in consciousness, to express something holy through your being. This connection nourishes the soul when relationships fall short. It fills the gaps society cannot. It strengthens you from the inside out. 8. Begin saying no, even when it's uncomfortable. So much of a man's suffering comes from saying yes to what drains him, and no to what calls him. Start reversing that. Say no to the party you don't want to attend. Say no to the text that pulls you into unnecessary drama. Say no to the dating app if you're using it to avoid yourself. And say yes to the harder thing, the gym, the cold shower, the hour of silence, the project that scares you. You don't owe anyone access to your peace. 9. Surround yourself with other conscious men, even if just one. Solitude does not mean isolation. Even Epicurus had his garden, a community of seekers. Find other men who are walking the inner path. Share honestly. Reflect without ego. Hold each other accountable not to performance, but to presence. Even one honest conversation a week can shift your entire mindset. 10. Practice ritual, not routine. Routine numbs. Ritual awakens. Turn your morning coffee into a meditation. Turn your evening walk into a gratitude practice. Light a candle before journaling. Bless your space before sleep. Small gestures, done with intention, become sacred acts. They remind you that every day is a ceremony, every breath a gift. The world may not understand the man who chooses this path. It may call him strange, antisocial, even selfish. But what the world cannot see is what he has gained. Not just time, not just peace, but sovereignty. He is no longer waiting to be chosen. He has chosen himself, and from that place of quiet power, he becomes the kind of man who transforms everything he touches, not through noise, but through presence, not through charm, but through clarity, not through chasing, but by simply being. When you live from that place, you will not just thrive alone. You will thrive anywhere. So what does it truly mean to thrive as a single man in today's world? It means walking a path few are brave enough to walk, not because it leads away from others, but because it leads toward yourself. It is the path of inner clarity, of emotional mastery, of quiet strength that does not need to announce itself. Epicurus wasn't a monk in a cave. He was a man who looked at the chaos of society and chose peace over performance. He saw that freedom wasn't found in wealth, in noise, in conquest. It was found in a simple life, a life rooted in friendship, clarity, and philosophical joy. Not isolation for its own sake, but solitude that sharpens the soul. Today, many confuse freedom with excess, with constant choice, constant novelty, constant stimulation. But what if real freedom is not about having everything, but needing less? What if a man becomes powerful not when he acquires the world, but when he no longer needs the world to validate him? The single man who thrives is not immune to love. He may still long for companionship, still feel desire, still ache for touch, but he is not ruled by it. He does not bargain his soul for a moment of connection. He does not pretend, perform, or pursue out of emptiness, because he has already made peace with the silence, and in that silence, he found something most people spend their entire lives avoiding: his true self. That's the difference. The average man avoids solitude because it threatens his ego. The thriving man seeks solitude because it strengthens his soul. And once you have tasted the strength that comes from standing on your own, without crutches, without distractions, without applause, you can finally enter the world again, not as a seeker, but as a giver. You become the man who brings peace into rooms simply by being in them. The man who listens more than he speaks. The man who doesn't chase validation because he already knows his worth. The man who can love without losing himself. Who can serve without self-sacrifice. Who can walk away when something violates his peace, not from bitterness, but from inner alignment. This is the man the world needs. Not more performers, not more reactors, not more loud, angry, attention-hungry men, but grounded men, still men. Men who have been through the fire of solitude and come out golden. You may not have chosen to be single. You may feel lost, confused, even abandoned. But let this truth anchor you. This season is not a punishment. It is a purification. It is the cocoon, not the cage. It is where the false dies, so that the true can be born. So stop waiting. Stop bargaining with fate. Stop postponing your wholeness until someone comes along to complete you. You are not half a soul waiting to be finished. You are already whole, already worthy, already capable of building a life of depth, meaning, and joy right now. Use this season. Own it, bless it, shape it. Because when you do, you will not only become the kind of man who thrives alone, you'll become the kind of man who could choose anyone, but no longer needs to choose out of fear. You love better, lead better, live clearer, and whether you walk this path alone or with another by your side, you will never again be lost, because you have found yourself. And there is no greater home than that. If you've made it this far, you're not just here to consume another video. You're here because something in your soul is waking up, a quiet, powerful hunger to understand yourself more deeply, to live with more intention, to build a life not based on noise, but on inner truth. And if that resonates, you're in the right place. This channel isn't about surface-level hacks or shallow advice. It's a space for real reflection, for those who are tired of pretending, tired of performing, and ready to do the deeper work. Here, we explore what it means to reclaim your personal power, not the kind that dominates others, but the kind that anchors you, that helps you lead with clarity, love with boundaries, and live with purpose. Whether you walk alone or with someone beside you, we dive into the teachings of great thinkers like Epicurus, Jung, Marcus Aurelius, and more, not as dead philosophers, but as living voices still speaking to our struggles today. We blend ancient wisdom with modern psychology, so you're not just inspired, you're equipped, So if you're ready to stop running from solitude, if you're ready to start turning your silence into strength, if you're ready to build a life that's deeply yours, then I invite you, not as a content creator, but as a fellow traveler, to subscribe, not just to a channel, but to a journey into self-mastery, emotional clarity, inner peace, a life lived from the inside out. We're not here to impress, we're here to awaken, because somewhere in this noisy world, there has to be a space for thoughtful men and women to grow, quietly, powerfully, honestly, and that space is here. So take a breath, hit subscribe, and keep walking with us. The journey doesn't end here. It's only just beginning.